Thank you for joining me, everyone. For those who don't know me yet, my name is Ron Levine from Mindfulness in Blue Jeans. I have been practicing mindfulness and insight meditation for almost 25 years. And I was brought to the practice during a time when I was dealing with clinical anxiety and depression and a raging panic disorder that had blown up into agoraphobia. So I was unable to work. I was on short-term disability. I was unable to leave the house. And I happened to get paired up with a psychologist who, even back in 1998, was already several decades deep into practicing and teaching mindfulness and insight meditation. And he offered me these tools and techniques as a way of dealing with what I was going through. I was not thrilled with his suggestion. My feeling was, hey, I can't work, I can't go out, my life has stopped. And here's this guy talking about watching the breathing and stuff? Huh? Thanks, okay. I figured, all right, well, I'm sitting at home panicking all day anyway. I might as well give this a shot just long enough. I can go back to him and honestly say, look, dude, this didn't work. Can I have the real treatment now? And as I say, this was almost 25 years ago, and I've never had that conversation with him. I still practice daily. Now I teach. And I'm just about ready to admit there might be something to all of this. And here I am. And thank you for being with me. I like to offer this ongoing series I call Calming Anxiety by Living Mindfully, to share some of the tools and techniques that have been shown to me over the years, that I've come up with for myself over the years, because I know I'm not the only one out there with a history of these issues. So it's part of my way of giving back. So let's jump in, okay? I always like to begin my sitting by imagining that I am suspended from the ceiling by a piece of string attached to the top of my head, as a nice cue to sit up straight, without adding any extra tension to do so. If we're experiencing some tension right now, that's fine. That is completely fine. Very often we try to get rid of tension by forcing it away, which is what? Adding more tension to the tension that's already there, right? I've never found that to be very skillful or effective. So if tension is here right now, we can simply notice that tension is here right now, and that's really all we have to do. I also like to notice what is beneath me, supporting me. Chair, cushion, floor. I'm making contact with something that is holding me up. And it's quite capable of the job, and I can allow it to do so. Let's take a moment to notice this grounding, this support beneath us, and this suspension from the ceiling at the top, and whatever else happens to be in between the two for us right now, however it is. And if you haven't already, you may begin to bring your attention to your breathing. Now, very often when we bring our attention to our breathing, we begin to shape or control it somehow, either because we think we are supposed to as part of this practice, or simply because we've become so habituated to engaging in some kind of controlling over the breathing when we are aware of it. In the same way that we can simply notice any tension that may be here, or perhaps notice the absence of tension if there isn't any, we can simply notice the breathing, however it is. The same way that that cushion, that chair, that floor is capable of holding us up, and we can allow it to do so, the body is capable of breathing. It knows what to do. We can allow it to do so. Now that's a little bit trickier than simply allowing the ground or the chair to hold us up. So if there's still some controlling, some shaping of the breathing, we don't have to fight with that the same way we don't have to fight with tension. The same way we don't bring more tension to get rid of tension. We don't want to bring controlling of the controlling to get rid of controlling, right? Doesn't make much sense when you put it that way. So let's just take a moment or two and notice this process of breathing. However it is. And if there is a process of controlling or shaping going on around it, well, we just notice how that is too. And see what just the simple light of attention to those processes brings about. Now, these tendencies that we have to meet tension with tension, to meet controlling with more controlling, these are examples of how we are not passive recipients of our experience. Something comes up, internally or externally. We have reactions. And based on those reactions, we engage in some kind of responses. And the reactions and responses that we experience and engage in are ones that have been conditioned from previous experiences, right? We're not a blank slate coming into our experiences. We're bringing something to them. Our past experiences, our memories of them, our judgments, our fears, our desires, our aversions. And we're bringing all that. And then we have some kind of experience in the present moment. And based on all of that past stuff, we have certain reactions, engage in certain responses, sometimes completely on autopilot, right? Stuff we've been habituated to for years. And very often, as part of this, we are generating content, storylines, about what's happening. Perhaps based on memories of the last time we had a similar experience. Perhaps based on what we want or do not want from the experience. For me, it usually starts as having some kind of a mental image about something, perhaps that's coming up in the near future. And in my mind, I see this image, perceive this image, interpret this image. Not deliberately. I mean, this is all instantaneous stuff, right? This just happens. But then based on that image, based on that perception, based on that interpretation, now I start spinning a storyline, right? Start generating some content about it. Start thinking about what I have to do in the situation that I'm now picturing. Picturing how I want it to play out. Or more often, picturing how I don't want it to play out. Right? Usually in a well-intentioned but ultimately dysfunctional attempt to feel like I'm in control of the situation, I'll start imagining all the worst case scenarios about it, right? Just to, be prepared. Right? And then continuously spin those storylines to continue to make sure I will be prepared, right? When the Buddha talks about how we cause our own stress and suffering, and that was the only thing he taught, was how we stop creating our own stress and suffering. This is what he was talking about. Our subconscious minds and bodies don't know the difference between what's really happening and what we are imagining is happening. That's why we can imagine something that we don't want to happen, and our body will start to react as if it's actually happening. And then, of course, our body's reaction is a cue to the mind that, oh, there really is a problem here. And we've created this feedback loop. This is exactly how I created years of panic for myself. I created my own panic. through storylines, content. And one of the most powerful methods of short-circuiting that process is to observe it as the process that it is. We observe the process of the writing of these storylines, of the generation of this content, rather than getting caught up in the content itself. We start pulling the curtain back a little bit. No, wait a minute. Who's writing this stuff? Somebody's writing it. Right? I'm not writing your storylines, you're not writing mine. But somebody's writing it, so we begin to see that process. The reason it works so well is because as humans, we cannot multitask. We can bounce back and forth between different things in our brain very quickly. It may feel like we're multitasking, but we can really only work with one thing at a time. So in any given instant, when we are focusing on the process, we are not focusing on the content. We are either observing the process of the storyline being generated, or we're getting caught up in the content of that storyline. But we can't do both at the same time. Now, I make this sound simple, and it is simple, but it's not easy. But in my experience, it's not just possible, it's extremely worth it. So we practice consistently, persistently, with compassion and patience. But we simply watch the process of something coming up, the reaction, a response, and the thoughts, the feelings, the bodily sensations that start to come up around it. Noticing how they play off of each other, how those feedback loops form. Begin to see the false reality that we create out of illusion. Which is why I like to say that this is a process of disillusionment. We see what's really happening here, and we see our role in it. We can do this just with the breathing. We can focus on the breathing. And notice any thoughts or feelings that might arise around it. Notice how we might pick a particular thought or feeling and begin to chase it down a rabbit hole, how it takes us away from our concentration, our focus on the breathing. We practice catching that, coming back. And if we have generated a storyline about how we're a terrible meditator because we chased a thought or a feeling down the rabbit hole, and we notice, oh, there's another storyline. There's more content I've generated about my practice, about my self, whatever that is. Everything's a process. And every process is observable. Including the process of watching the processes. Watching these processes arise, change, pass. Just like the process of breathing, each breath arises, changes, passes. As does every thought, every feeling, every bodily sensation. Sometimes quickly, sometimes not so much. But watching this again and again, in all these various ways, we start to really see, not just intellectually, but at a felt level, what the Buddha was talking about when he talked about impermanence, inconstancy. Because one of my biggest problems historically with those mental images, where I'm picturing all those worst case scenarios, is when it gets to the absolute worst of the worst moment. That's when I freeze the picture. Like, that's when time is going to stop. That's the part that's going to end up being permanent, unchanging. And I'm just going to be stuck there forever in that frozen, horrifying moment. And isn't it amazing how we can fall into an illusion like that when we've lived for decades and have clearly seen it doesn't work that way? The fear overrides that rationality, that logic. But when we start observing the other effects of that fear process, like the storyline generation, we start to see through it. We start to see how the sausage is made. Oh, this is what's going on behind the curtain. And we start to experience that disillusionment. And those frozen mental images, well, they start to thaw out a little bit. So as you go through the rest of your day, notice whether it's with the breathing, with something else that's arising internally, thought, feeling, bodily sensation, perhaps something that is arising externally. Notice the process of perception, interpretation, reaction, response. Notice the content that comes up and how we can get carried away by it. And notice the process of the creation of that content and how paying attention to the process short circuits, even if just for an instant, our tendency to get carried away by that content. And we have an instant here, and an instant there, and an instant there. We continue to build our skill at doing this. This is how we start to build a sustainable bridge to our freedom. Thank you, everyone. I will hang on for a few minutes if anyone would like to share anything in the chat. Any thoughts, observations, any questions? Ren, yep. I have this ongoing pain, constantly thinking about the worst scenario. Start to wonder if I'm not making it worse by doing that. Yeah, this is classic stuff right here. This is what the Buddha called the second arrow, right? We've got pain, which you're experiencing some kind of pain. But then, based on what we're doing with it, again, we're not passive recipients of our experience. So here you're having an experience of pain, but what are we doing with it? And very often that's what we do with it, is start spinning a worst case scenario. Oh, this pain must mean that, it must mean that, it must mean that. Bracing ourselves for the worst. So if the worst happens, we'll be, ready somehow. We'll be inoculated to it a bit. We'll have already experienced some of it. So maybe the brunt won't be quite so bad. And really all we're doing is living that worst case scenario over and over and over again. That's suffering. That's suffering. And this is what the Buddha taught that we could escape from. Not the pain, necessarily. We're going to experience pain, but the suffering that we add on top of it. That's what we're working with here. So we notice the generation of that content, of those storylines. What story am I spinning about this sensation that I'm having? One of the things I talk about a lot is when I started working with physical discomfort in this practice, because obviously I came to it, as I mentioned, because of mental issues. But after a while of observing mental processes, and I should say not even after a while of it, but as part of it, really, because with panic, there's so many physical manifestations. I started to inquire into physical discomfort. And one of the things I talk about a lot is how surprised I was when I stopped pushing up against physical discomfort. Like I was talking about at the beginning, bringing tension to tension, fighting with physical discomfort, which made it feel very stuck, like this monolithic block, this unmoving block inside of me. And then just started opening to it and breathing around it and breathing into it, breathing through it. Maybe not literally, if it's in my arm or something, you're just imagining it. But of course, whenever we breathe, the breath does reach every cell in the body. It is getting there. But it was very surprising to me to find, oh, wait a minute. When I stop fighting with this thing, it's not solid. There's a lot of movement and pulsation, waves of sensation, increasing, decreasing intensity, all kinds of stuff. Sometimes I can't even pinpoint exactly where the sensation is originating from, or it seems to move and shift. It's like, oh, wow. Because I stopped generating the storyline saying, I got to get this thing the hell out of here now, or at least if I can't get rid of it, I need to ignore it, stop feeling it somehow. Start saying, well, no, wait a minute, what's actually here? Let's drop that storyline for a minute and inquire a little. What is this exactly? And boy, was I surprised. And what's nice is it doesn't necessarily make pain or discomfort go away, but it does certainly change our relationship with it. And also decreases our suffering, which is very nice. It's if my choice is to experience pain and suffering or just pain without suffering, I'll take the pain without the suffering. Thank you. Right? I'll take that. From Michelle, there's one about short circuit in my recordings. It's one of my first ones, short circuiting our suffering. Yeah, I think that was in the first group of 4 that I ever did. There was the art of true release, short circuiting our suffering, unlocking acceptance, and Mindfulness for Managing Thoughts, I think. It's one of those first few that I did, Short-Circuiting Our Suffering. And that's out here on Insight Timer, as well as the Mindfulness in Blue Jeans YouTube channel and Patreon pages. Becky, yeah, that's been my experience. Our relationship to the pain changing as a result of not going to war with it. What happens is, you ever hear that phrase, what we resist persists. When we go to war with the stuff, well, like I say, it's a process. So if we're going to war with it, now it has to, fight with us. And that's the process it has to engage in, is the fighting with us, which means the process that it is, the thing that it's trying to process, is not having a chance to process. And it's not going to go until it does have a chance to process what it originally came to process. So when we are not fighting with it, it has a chance to process. And what happens? It processes. That part of the arising and the changing and the passing, it gets to change and pass. But as long as we're fighting with it, it doesn't have that chance to change and pass. It's too busy fighting us. And there is no us and them, right? Because it's all just us. It's a civil war. So whose way are we getting in? Our own. When we stop doing that, amazing things happen. That's been my experience. It sounds like yours as well. So I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, Michelle, that's the thing about the fear. I cover this is another one of my early sessions. For those of you familiar with my Control Freak series. And again, you can find this here on Insight Timer. It's out on, again, Mindfulness in Blue Jeans YouTube and Patreon channels. In the Control Freak series, it's a 3-part series. And the second one, the middle part, is called Stop Poking the Bear. And I cover this topic in that one about how we use our fear as a way to, when I talk about this, picturing the worst case scenario over and over again, we're trying to stave off or lessen an anticipated future possibility of pain that we think will be overwhelming if we do not engage in some kind of inoculation against it, with that inoculation being, okay, I'm going to try to experience some of it now. So it's not such a shock later, right? And what we end up doing is creating so much more stress and suffering over the course of all the time that we are engaging in this process. Again, we are engaging in this process. We are creating our suffering. We are creating our stress. We are generating these storylines, this content. And we are doing it for the same reason we as humans do anything we do. We do it because we think we're going to get something out of it. We think we're going to get something that is worth at least the effort we're putting into it out of it. But are we? Are we really? Or is that one of these illusions? Are we really avoiding a future pain that may or may not happen by engaging with it as if it is happening over and over and over again? And in the long run, what's creating more pain? What's creating suffering? That one-time incident, even if it happens, and even if it happens as badly as we're fearing it's going to, or the hours, days, weeks, months, years of this well-intentioned but ultimately really dysfunctional anticipation. Are we really getting that return on our investment? Is this really the best use of our energy, of our effort, of our time? I give a couple of specific examples of this, like real-world examples, in that Stop Poking the Bear session. So if anyone would like to check that out, feel free. I think I'll wrap it up there. Thank you all so much, everyone. Hope to see you all again real soon. Cheers.